The left has lived in a delusional, theoretical reality for literally centuries at this point. I mean, you could go back to Marx, to even latter-day socialist thinkers like Lenin or Mao, and see many examples of the left and extreme left, more particularly, living in a theoretical reality that they believe can be imposed on the actual reality. A great example of this, of course, being Lysenkoism, which was essentially communist plant science that ended up causing multiple famines and many untold millions of people to starve in China alone. This caused a number of things to happen, but it didn't really cause any of the communists to admit that they were wrong about any of these things. And this continues into today with the modern left in America, where the American left has been continually, over decades, pushing ideas and concepts and policies which have been theoretically correct, but in actuality are incredibly disastrous. Let's take, for example, the transgender bathroom policy, where there has been a completely wall-to-wall push for transgender people to be able to go into the bathroom of the gender they identify with, rather than the sex which they actually are. And this has led to a number of incredibly bad things to happen. Let's take, for example, something that's been in the news quite a bit recently, the story of the forced sodomy of a girl in a school bathroom during school hours by a boy wearing a skirt who was bisexual. This was covered up by the school, of course, and led to the father of the girl who was sodomized being arrested at a school board meeting and called a domestic terrorist, despite the fact that he was in the right, totally and completely. He did nothing wrong in actuality, but in theory, that isn't necessarily the case, because if you subscribe to leftist theory that transgender women are women and trans men are men, then no matter what the actual evidence is, no matter how many prison inmates get raped and impregnated by transgender inmates, it doesn't matter to them. They are going to continue down this path because theoretically they have decided that their policy of with regard to transgenders must in fact be right. And this is also on top of a doubling down, which was one of the strangest things from the ACLU of Virginia, simply saying trans kids are not a threat. All, as far as I can tell, in response to that very same story that we were talking about, which is just absurd. But it's not just on the level of social issues or culture war issues. It's also on the level of medical issues. There have been many examples, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic, of the left deciding theoretically that something must be the case, and then continuing to prattle on about that exact thing and push it as hard as it can, regardless of whatever evidence comes out in the interim. You can bring this back to masks, to lockdowns, and also to vaccines, where they have said it is extremely safe and effective. Whereas they have failed to mention that their definitions of safe and effective have changed quite drastically in the past few months. It's gone from the idea of there are no side effects whatsoever, nothing has gone on, to, okay, there are side effects, but it's not that many. And for effective, it's gone from completely 100% effective, it completely prevents infection in all cases, to it might help you with hospitalization. And to be clear, to YouTube censors out there, I'm not saying that the vaccine is not efficient and or it's not safe. It is both of those things, based on your standard of safety and efficacy. Whether I agree with that standard or not is another issue entirely, but for the sake of you, we'll just call it even. And this has led to a number of things, most pertinent in the public eye, being that Kyle Irving has been limited and completely prevented, in fact, from being able to play basketball entirely. he's been basically kicked off the nets. And that's kind of absurd, especially as just a few days later it was discovered that another NBA player is also out of season because of the vaccine. But in his case, it was because the vaccine had blood clot side effects, which ended up being a bit of a problem for him, leading him to, as previously mentioned, leave the league for the season. That is the actual evidence of these claims, and it's quite funny in the case of coronavirus, where all of the policies which are designed around it is essentially based on the idea that once you get COVID-19, or even if you haven't got COVID-19, you have COVID-19. So even I, who had COVID-19 about 2.5 months ago, and hasn't had any symptoms to that effect in about 2 months, still functionally has coronavirus and has to wear the mask, get the vaccine, all of that sort of stuff, go through the social distancing rigmarole and everything, because the left has theoretically decided, Dr. Fauci very much included, that everyone has coronavirus at all times, unless they have the vaccine, but maybe not. Also, maybe they still have to mask as well, whatever. That's what they've decided. And this doesn't just go to those issues, it also goes to the economic issues, where it is in fact the most detrimental, the most catastrophic, I would say, to the broad scale of people. I mean, this isn't to say that other aspects of this aren't bad. Of course, vaccine mandates affect a lot of people and are going to cause a lot of problems, though they haven't fully shown their effects as of yet. And, of course, the transgender bathroom policy and the rape of children in schools would be a problem for the individual people to whom it happens, and their families and friends and that sort of thing. But on an even broader scale, talking about basically everyone in the society, the left's economic theoretical reality has been much more detrimental to everyone broad scale. And this is no better represented than by Joe Biden himself, the resident himself of the White House. Fake White House, though. You see, his economic policies have been an utter disaster, which hasn't kept the Democrats from defending him on that particular front. They've been going about simply saying, well, he's totally fine. His job numbers are better than before. They're on an upward trajectory. It's totally fine. Nothing's going wrong. It's not as though the September jobs report was an utter disappointment, and it's not as though more detrimental effects are coming in the interim, like, say, a massive spike in home oil prices and any other heating implements that would be required for many northern states in this upcoming winter, or it doesn't have anything to do with the supply chain problems, which have become a massive issue over the past few days. Oh, no. None of those things are going to become a problem because, you see, the left has decided that if we only pass the $3.5 trillion spending bill, or I guess now $2 trillion, considering that they couldn't get past the $3.5 trillion version, then every economic problem would be solved, and there would be no problems whatsoever. Of course, that's an utter fantasy world. It's not how any of this actually works, but I guess it is how they theoretically imagine it to work, so it must be fine. Though you might say, in response to all this, that this is just, this is just politicians, this is just school boards, this is just the NBA. And so it's just those environments. It's not going to have any massive detrimental effects more long-term. I'm sure it won't have any effects on, say, children. No. That's not the case. I mean, there was recently a column which was semi-viral with regard to a son who was cataloging a Soviet-style blackmail list of problematic behaviors his classmates were doing. And this advice column was a goldmine. I went through the entire thing, and it wasn't just the Soviet-style Hitler Youth kid who was an absolute riot. The rest of the questions were also quite funny in many different ways, though some of them, of course, were more serious than others. But in this case, the funniest thing about that first story, and the headline one which got all the attention, would happen to be something that not many people know, and that was what issues the Slate ethical child pornography site columnists took issue with, and who the original author of the question took issue with regard to this actual thing. Because you see, in both of those cases, their problem was not the idea that this kid was making a list of his classmates' wrongdoings, or potentially attempting to get them canceled or whatnot. No. The problem, actually, with the questioner was, well, he's white, so why isn't a BIPOC doing that? And for the columnist, it was, well, it's not organized enough. We should really get him into more productive ways of promoting social justice and doing the exact same thing he's already doing, but put him in a more centralized structure. He should volunteer to be a big brother, which is an exact quote from the actual column itself. I don't even know what it's referring to. I can only imagine. Or go into some other activist group of some sort. I can only imagine what sort of depravity these sorts of people are actually going to promote on this kid. And this is all, of course, due to the theoretical reality that they have constructed around this kid. Because if he was living in actual reality, where the things people say, though they may be offensive, really lack a whole lot of importance once you get down to the meat of things, is replaced entirely by a theoretical reality where every single thing someone says and every single thing they do, if it's an even slight deviation from the party line, it must then be a sign of deep revolt and of deep moral failings on the part of the person doing it. That is the theoretical reality they have constructed around these kids, and it's the theoretical reality that's being constructed around the entire society. Now, of course, as I am wont to mention, these theoretical realities are not complete, and they are not, at all, indicative of necessarily where we're going to go. As I would argue, these things have been in existence for quite a long time, and the fact that we are now noticing them and fully aware of what's going on is very, it's a very good thing indeed, and a very heartening thing. And so, that doesn't mean you don't need to fight against this sort of thing. You need to fight against it all over the place, because every single place this thing appears, this theoretical reality, it will erode every single thing about wherever it goes. It will wear it around like a skin suit, and will simply deny the actual reality, which will end up biting it in the long run, and biting all of us in the long run. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. I'm KelKidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.